I think a little bit of both, and my colleagues will come in later on. A lot of pledges were made. What is unique is a lot of pledges were made, but how much of these have come into fruition is questionable, because and I don't know whether people would now, or governments would now want to hide behind the financial crisis, but I think the political will to do something is not matched with any tangible results. You could go to any of these summits, such as the one in Rome, something that happened in Madrid fairly closely, and you get the same sort of pronouncements of how food production should be developed, how it should be increased. We know what it will take, what policy options are available, and how much money it will take. If we're able to find $800 billion for bailing out US banks, or $200 billion for armaments for governments, we're just looking at a modest $5 to $7 billion annually to eradicate poverty and hunger globally. So it's not vast sums of money, it's the political will and the connection which I think is lacking. We hope that initiatives such as these will keep this momentum going and enable policymakers to see the need to do so. As I started off earlier on, we seem to be in a sort of an abeyance at the moment, but believe you me, in 24 months, we're going to see a resurgence of the food crisis. As soon as energy prices go up, as soon as there's more stability in the financial markets, you are going to see that food is going to be on top of the agenda again.
I think we are also seeing additional funding at the field level. You know, for example, when we consider West Africa, where I work, and I'm particularly happy that, you know, there's one portion of that funding that is going to relieve efforts. You know, to kind of to focus really on alleviating the current situation. But at the same time, I think there has been a realization that you do have to work on those underlying issues, whether kind of more strategic ones that can be solved hopefully in a medium term, hopefully in the coming few years, or then the ones that really require large changes in the way, you know, agricultural trade, etc., are being conducted. So I am particularly happy about the fact that the way the discussion is now is that we do really clearly separate that, yes, there's need for relief, but the relief is not enough. What we need really is development in the medium term and development in the longer term to ensure that this crisis will not happen anymore.
I think one interesting development is that there's now realization that there's need for African countries in particular to grow their own staples. Rather than depend on food aid, I think most of our governments are now very clear that unless you have the inputs at the right time for farmers who can produce to go onto the land, food aid is not going to solve your problems, because I think most of the focus has been more on the output markets, where we've said liberalize your markets, you'll be able to buy from anywhere. But this food crisis was a wake-up call. The markets were not functional, borders were closed, you could not buy even if you had the money. What that means is, at least for your staples, produce enough, and governments are putting more focus into making inputs available, and they are subsidizing those inputs. And a lot of countries are moving into input vouchers to make sure that farmers can access inputs. So I think things are happening. Why aren't other countries replicating the Malawi success story? It is happening. There is learning that's happening, and I can bring up specific examples: Zambia, Botswana, Nigeria. Of late on internet, they are implementing voucher programs en masse for this current season. But I think the main thing is really the fact that some of these doable changes are not billable items. It's about policies. It's really about priorities. For a long time, we've waited because there's free food aid coming in, so it was easy to divert the national budgets into other priorities as seen by the politicians. But the beauty, which is a blessing in disguise with this food crisis, is that those with money could not buy. And I think the wake-up call is produce your own. And how do you produce your own? If you do not get donor support, as happened in Malawi, the government could not get donor support because they wanted to subsidize inputs, and most of the donors 3 years ago said, we don't touch subsidies. Government of Malawi increased its own budget, national allocation to agriculture, to support the farmers, and the returns are evident. Now the donors have come back to Malawi and they are supporting the input voucher program. So I think it's a lesson well learned.
I think replicating the Malawi experience at the level of Africa, sub-Saharan Africa, would be very costly. So there is a financial issue, I think, involved. Countries like Nigeria, which have been subsidizing fertilizer already for a long time, often at extremely high levels, because the subsidies come at the federal, at the state, and often even at the local level. So the final subsidy is often extremely high. But then, so countries such as Nigeria, which has access to oil resources, are able to afford it. But if you look at the bill that would be for subsidizing fertilizers across sub-Saharan Africa, it would be a high bill then. So I think, but then of course, you say, well, you can use it as a springboard for greater development when you are bringing those farmers who are not within who are not accessing any markets, who do not have any surplus, if you can bring them in and that way initiate development. So I do think that there's also a cost issue, and it would be difficult probably to do it at that scale, at least very soon.
Being a farmer, I also grow maize, and also grow wheat and soybeans. There are a number of other staples that are grown region-specific, and I think cassava and millet and sorghum come to my mind. What has happened again is the negative side to subsidies has been that a lot of these fertilizer or input subsidies were targeted at a specific crop, and as a consequence you found that some of these other crops, such as your sorghum, your millet, your cassava, were over a period of time not grown in the values they should have been, because apparently the farmer found it more easier to access inputs that were targeted to certain specific crops. But there are a number of these, and what is happening by and large with this vacuum which is created by the lack of inputs, people are now reverting back to their traditional crops. And what needs to be done again, based on this same model, is more research and technical innovation to enable us to upscale and ensure more productivity of these crops, and to ensure that they're grown in larger numbers. You asked for your second question. Sorry, I didn't jot it down. I think also it's again two-pronged. National budgets. We had a Maputo declaration going back to the African context, which was a declaration which says African governments will commit 10% of their budget towards agriculture. By and large, a lot of these support programs could be taken by national budgets, provide there's prioritization and it's focused and targeted. What is important, even with these fertilizer subsidies, which I think nobody's highlighted, is they have to be focused and specific with a clear exit strategy. Because if you continue with this over a longer period of time, it's going to be very, very critical for national budgets to carry it through. I think the idea is to make a critical intervention and provide some sort of equity distribution to smallholder farmers who don't have it. You build the equity and then maybe mainstream them into small-scale entrepreneurs who are working within the market. I think that's the key. But I'm sure my two colleagues, if there's anything more they'd like to add up to those questions.